The Grand Convocation Hall on the Sar Prime was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Its ceiling rose so high, the clouds sometimes formed inside it. Crystal windows stretched across walls that could hold entire cities. And today, like every year for the past 3,000 years, representatives from 47 spacefaring species had gathered here to discuss the future of civilization. Ambassador Daniel Porter sat in the human section, trying not to look bored. The Volanthi representative had been talking about mining rights for nearly 2 hours. His voice was like the sound of water running over stones, and Porter found his eyes growing heavy. Beside him, Commander Lisa Turner checked her tablet for the 4th time in 10 minutes. She was the head of the human security delegation, and she hated sitting still. Her job was to protect people, not to listen to speeches about who owned which asteroid. How much longer? She whispered to Porter. Another hour at least, he replied quietly. Maybe 2. Turner groaned softly and leaned back in her chair. Humans were still relatively new to galactic politics. They had only joined the Council 30 years ago, after their first ships reached beyond their home system. In that time, they had earned a strange reputation. The other species did not know what to make of them. Earth was what the galaxy called a death world. Its gravity was heavy. Its weather was violent. Its animals were dangerous. The fact that humans had survived there at all was remarkable. The fact that they had built cities and machines, and eventually starships, was almost impossible to believe. Because of this, the other species watched humans with a mixture of curiosity and unease. They were friendly enough, these humans. They smiled a lot and seemed eager to make friends. But there was something behind their eyes that made other beings nervous. Something old and dangerous that they kept carefully hidden. Captain Ryan Cole sat 2 rows behind the ambassador. He was young for his position, only 32 years old, but he had already seen more combat than most officers twice his age. Right now, he was fighting a different kind of battle. He was trying to stay awake. The Volanthi speaker droned on. Something about trade routes. Something about fair compensation. Cole's eyes started to close. Then his communicator buzzed. He blinked and looked down at the device on his wrist. A red light was flashing. Red meant emergency. Red meant drop everything and pay attention. Cole opened the message and read it. His blood turned to ice. He looked up and saw that every human in the hall was doing the same thing. Every communicator had activated at exactly the same moment. Every human face had gone pale. Ambassador Porter stared at his screen for a long moment. His hands were shaking slightly. Then he took a deep breath and stood up. The Volanthi speaker stopped talking. Every eye in the massive hall turned toward the human delegation. Porter did not say a word. He simply raised his hand and made a gesture that every human understood. It was a military signal, one that had been used for centuries on Earth. It meant only one thing: we leave. Now, Commander Turner was already on her feet. So was Captain Cole. So was every human diplomat, security officer, translator, and aide in the entire building. They moved together like a single organism, rising from their seats and walking toward the exits. The alien delegates watched in confusion. The Dazari speaker, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms, called out to them. Ambassador Porter, what is the meaning of this? We are in the middle of a session. Porter did not stop walking. Neither did any of the other humans. The confusion turned to alarm. Species that had known each other for millennia began whispering nervously. The humans were leaving. All of them. At once. Without explanation. This had never happened before. The Kovathi ambassador, a small creature covered in blue scales, tried to block the nearest exit. Please, he said, looking up at the humans streaming past him. Tell us what is wrong. We can help. No one answered him. The humans kept moving. In the center of the hall, the Volante elder, who had been speaking moments ago, turned to his aide. His face was troubled. "Something terrible has happened," he said quietly. "Look at their eyes. They are afraid. Should we be afraid too?" The aide asked. The elder did not answer. At the main entrance, Ambassador Porter finally paused. The massive doors stood open before him, showing the purple sky of the Sara Prime beyond. He could hear the footsteps of his people behind him, hundreds of humans moving with desperate purpose. The Thesari speaker had followed him. She stood nearby, her silver face full of concern. "Ambassador," she said, "please. Whatever has happened, we deserve to know. We are your allies." Porter turned to look at her. His eyes were dark with something she had never seen in a human before. It was not fear, exactly. It was something deeper, something more primal. "Pray for us," he said. Then he walked through the doors and was gone. The hall erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted at each other in a dozen different languages. Some demanded answers. Others began calling their own ships, suddenly afraid that whatever threatened the humans might threaten them, too. The Volante elder stood very still in the middle of the storm. He had lived for over 400 years. He had seen wars and plagues and disasters of every kind. But he had never seen anything like this. What could frighten him so badly? His aide asked. "Humans fear nothing. Everyone knows this." The elder shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Humans fear many things. They simply refuse to let their fear stop them." He paused, watching the last of the human delegates disappear through the doors. That is what makes them so terrifying. Outside, the first human shuttles were already launching toward orbit. In the sky above the Sara Prime, the running lights of massive warships began to glow as engines powered up for emergency departure. The galaxy watched in terror as humans rushed from the assembly. None of them knew yet where the humans were going, but all of them sensed, deep in their bones, that the universe was about to change forever. The human flagship Resolute Hope was the largest warship humanity had ever built. It stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, and its hull was covered with enough weapons to destroy a small moon. Right now, it hung in orbit above the Sara Prime, and its crew was preparing for war. Admiral Kevin Grant stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. He was 53 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had commanded ships for 30 years. He had fought pirates and rebels and hostile aliens. But he had never received an order like this. The door behind him opened, and Ambassador Daniel Porter walked onto the bridge. His diplomatic robes were wrinkled, and his face was pale with exhaustion. He had not slept in 18 hours. "Admiral," Porter said, "thank you for waiting." "You have 5 minutes," Grant replied. His voice was flat and hard. "Then we leave, with or without a full briefing." Porter nodded and activated the holographic display in the center of the bridge. A planet appeared, blue and green and beautiful. It looked almost like Earth. "This is New Harbor," Porter said. "Human colony. Population 2 million. Founded 40 years ago." He paused. 12 hours ago, they were attacked. The image changed. Now it showed ships. Hundreds of ships. They were black and angular, covered with spikes and strange symbols. They looked like something from a nightmare. "The Keth Dominion," Porter said quietly. Admiral Grant's face did not change, but his hands tightened behind his back. Every officer on the bridge went still. The Keth were a legend, a story told to frighten children. They came from the far edge of the galaxy, from regions of space that no civilized species had ever explored. According to the stories, they did not conquer worlds. They did not take prisoners. They simply destroyed everything in their path and moved on. Most species believed the Keth were a myth, a tale invented long ago to explain why certain regions of space were empty. "They're real," Grant said. It was not a question. "They're real," Porter confirmed. "And they're killing our people right now." He played a recording. It was broken and full of static, but the voice was clear enough. A man speaking quickly, fear evident in every word. "This is Governor Nathan Brooks of New Harbor Colony. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. Repeat, we are under attack. Our defense grid is failing. Civilian casualties are heavy. We need immediate assistance. Please. Anyone who can hear this. We need help." The recording ended. Silence filled the bridge. "How long do they have?" Grant asked. 6 hours, Porter replied. "Maybe less. After that, there won't be anyone left to save." Grant turned to his navigation officer. "Time to New Harbor at maximum speed?" 5 hours and 20 minutes, sir. But we'd have to push the engines past their safety limits." "Do it, sir. At that speed, we risk." "I know what we risk." Grant's voice was calm but absolute. "Do it anyway." The navigation officer nodded and began entering commands. Dr. Amy Price stood near the back of the bridge. She was the ship's chief xenobiologist, and she had been studying alien species for 20 years. She had never studied the Keth. No one had. Until now, no one believed they existed. "Admiral," she said carefully, "the nearest Allied fleet is the Volanthi 3rd Squadron. They could reach New Harbor in 12 hours. "Too late," Grant replied, "and the Dasari carrier group is 14 hours away." "Also too late." Price hesitated. "Sir, our fleet has 47 ships. If the Keth really have 200 warships at New Harbor, we'll be outnumbered more than 4 to 1. Grant turned to look at her. His eyes were hard, but there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like grief. "Doctor," he said quietly, "there are 2 million human beings on that planet. Men, women, and children. They are being murdered right now while we stand here talking. I will not abandon them. I cannot abandon them. Not while there is still a chance to save even one of them." Price nodded slowly. She understood. They all understood. Humans did not leave their own behind. It was not a policy or a strategy. It was something deeper than that. Something built into their very bones. On the SAR Prime, the alien delegates were still in chaos. The humans had left so quickly that no one had time to ask questions. Now, fragments of human communications were being intercepted and translated. The Volanthi elder listened to the reports with growing horror. The Keth, the ancient destroyers, the nightmare from the edge of space. They were real, and they were here. "The humans are going to fight them," his aide said, disbelief clear in his voice. 47 ships against 200. They'll be slaughtered." "Yes," the elder replied. "They probably will. Then why are they going?" The elder was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with something that might have been respect. "Because their people are dying. And humans would rather die trying to save them than live knowing they did nothing." The aide shook his head. "That's insane. Perhaps." The elder watched the human ships disappear into faster-than-light travel, their engines burning so bright they left streaks across the sky. Or perhaps it is the sanest thing any of us has ever seen. In orbit, the last human shuttle docked with the Resolute Hope. The fleet was complete. "Admiral." Grant stood at the center of his bridge and looked at the stars ahead. Somewhere out there, his people were dying. Somewhere out there, an enemy waited that had not been seen in 10,000 years. He was probably leading his fleet to their deaths. He knew this. Every officer on every ship knew this. But there was no other choice. There had never been another choice. All ships, Grant said, his voice carrying across the entire fleet. Maximum speed to New Harbor. May God have mercy on us all. The human fleet vanished into the darkness between stars. Behind them, the galaxy watched and wondered if they would ever see the humans again. The human fleet tore through space at speeds that should have been impossible. Inside every ship, engines screamed and metal groaned under the strain. Warning lights flashed on every console. Engineers ran from crisis to crisis, holding their vessels together through sheer willpower. On the Resolute Hope, Sergeant Chris Bennett stood in the main hangar with his Marine squad. They were checking their weapons for the 5th time. There was nothing else to do during faster-than-light travel except prepare and wait. Bennett was 35 years old. He had been a Marine for 15 years, and he had fought in more battles than he could count. But this felt different. This felt like something final. "Sergeant," one of his soldiers said. She was young, barely 22. "What do we know about the Keth?" Bennett looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "Nothing good. They don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They just kill everything and move on. Then why are we going? Because there are families down there. Kids. People who have never held a weapon in their lives." Bennett checked his rifle one more time. "Someone has to stand between them and the monsters. That's us. That's always been us." The young soldier nodded slowly. She was afraid. They were all afraid. But none of them considered turning back. In another part of the ship, Lieutenant Michelle Scott sat in the pilot-ready room with her squadron. They were fighter pilots, the best in the fleet. In a few hours, they would be flying into the largest battle any of them had ever seen. Scott was studying the limited data they had on Keth ships. Their fighters were fast and heavily armed. Their bombers could reduce a city to ash in minutes. And there were hundreds of them. "We're going to lose a lot of people," one of her pilots said quietly. "Yes," Scott replied. She did not look up from her screen. "But we're going to save more than we lose. That's the math that matters." No one argued with her. There was nothing to argue about. Back on the SAR Prime, the Galactic Assembly had descended into something between panic and fascination. The humans were gone, racing toward a battle they could not win. And the aliens left behind could not stop talking about it. Counselor Deshvara was a Dasari historian. She had spent her entire life studying the species of the galaxy, trying to understand what made each of them unique. Humans had always fascinated her. Now she understood why that she stood before the assembly, a holographic display showing human history behind her. "You want to know why the humans left so quickly," she said. "You want to know why they did not ask for help. I will show you." The display changed to show an ancient Earth battle. Soldiers in primitive armor fighting against impossible odds. 3,000 years ago, a small group of human warriors held a mountain pass against an army of hundreds of thousands. They knew they would die. They fought anyway. Every single one of them. To the last man. The image changed again. Ships on an ocean, burning. 400 years ago, a human fleet was trapped in a harbor by a much larger enemy force. Instead of surrendering, they sailed directly into the enemy and fought until their ships sank beneath them. Another image, soldiers running across a beach toward fortified walls. 80 years ago, human soldiers charged into enemy fire to free people they had never met, from a country that was not their own. Thousands of them died in a single day. They kept coming. Deshvara turned to face the assembly. Her silver face was solemn. "This is what humans are. This is what they have always been. When their people are in danger, they do not calculate odds. They do not weigh costs and benefits. They simply go. And they fight until they win or until they are dead." The Volanthi ambassador rose from his seat. His voice was troubled. "Why didn't they ask us for help? We could have sent ships. Because they did not want to ask us to die for their people, HFY replied. They would rather die themselves than put that burden on others. Silence fell over the hall. It was a heavy silence, full of shame and wonder. Finally, a young Kavathi delegate stood up. He was small, and his scales were still bright with youth. I think we should help them, he said. His voice shook slightly, but he did not sit down. I think we should send ships. To fight the Keth? Another delegate asked. The ancient destroyers? We would be sending our people to die. The humans are already dying for their people, the young Kavathi replied. Should we do less? The debate that followed was fierce and fast. Some species refused immediately. The Keth were too dangerous. The risk was too great. But others hesitated. They looked at the human history still displayed on the screens. They thought about what it meant to have allies who would die for strangers. One by one, decisions were made. On the Resolute Hope, Admiral Grant received a message from the communication officer. His face showed surprise for the first time in years. Sir, the officer said, 5 alien vessels have broken formation from the SAR Prime. They're following us. Grant stared at the tactical display. 5 small lights moving fast, trying to catch up with the human fleet. Who are they? Kavathi destroyers, sir. And they're requesting permission to join our formation. Before Grant could respond, another message came in. Then another. Then another. 10 ships. 20 ships. 30 ships. Volanthi cruisers. The Zari carriers. Species that had never fought alongside humans before. Species that had barely spoken to humans before. They were all coming. Grant stood very still in the center of his bridge. Something strange was happening in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. Hope. Send a message to all allied vessels, he said quietly. Tell them thank you. And tell them to stay close. We're going to need every ship we can get. The combined fleet raced toward New Harbor. Humans and aliens, flying together into the unknown. For the first time in galactic history, the species of civilization were united by something other than fear. They were united by courage. And somewhere ahead, the Keth were waiting. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly into hell. New Harbor hung in space before them. A beautiful blue world wrapped in fire. Keth ships surrounded it like a swarm of black insects. There were more than 200 of them, just as the reports had said. Maybe more. Their weapons flashed constantly, raining destruction down on the planet below. Admiral Grunt did not hesitate for even a second. All ships, attack formation, he commanded. Weapons free. Protect the colony at all costs. The human fleet surged forward. 47 warships against more than 200. The math was terrible, but the humans attacked anyway. The Resolute Hope led the charge, its massive guns opening fire on the nearest Keth vessels. Energy beams and missiles filled the space between fleets. Explosions bloomed like flowers of light against the darkness. Lieutenant Michelle Scott launched from the hangar bay with her squadron. Her fighter was small and fast, barely larger than a shuttle. Against the massive Keth warships, it should have been insignificant. But Scott was not planning to fight warships. All fighters target the bombers, she called through her radio. Keep them away from the surface. Nothing else matters. Her squadron dove toward the planet. Below them, Keth bombers were making attack runs on the colony's cities. Each bomber could kill thousands of people with a single pass. Scott pushed her engines to maximum and opened fire. The first bomber exploded. Then the second. But there were so many more. On the surface of New Harbor, Sergeant Chris Bennett led his Marines through streets filled with smoke and screaming. The colony's capital city was burning. Buildings had collapsed. Bodies lay everywhere. But there were survivors. Hundreds of them. Thousands. They huddled in shelters and basements, waiting for someone to save them. Evacuation point Alpha is 2 kilometers north, Bennett shouted to his squad. We move fast, we grab everyone we can, and we get them to the shuttles. No one gets left behind. Understand? His Marines nodded and followed him into the chaos dot in the governor's bunker beneath the city. Nathan Brooks coordinated the evacuation. He was exhausted and covered in dust, but he refused to leave his post. He had been the leader of this colony for 15 years. He would not abandon his people now. Shuttle 7 is full, one of his aides reported. They're launching now. How many more can we save? Unknown, sir. The Keth are still bombing the eastern districts. Brooks closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them again. Tell the shelters to hold on. Help is coming. In orbit, the battle had become a nightmare of fire and metal. Human ships were taking heavy damage. The Keth outnumbered them badly, and their weapons were powerful. The destroyer Bright Star exploded under concentrated fire. The cruiser Morning Light lost its engines and began to drift, but the humans kept fighting. They threw themselves at the Keth fleet with a fury that bordered on madness. And slowly, impossibly, they began to push the enemy back. Then, the Allied ships arrived. The Kalvathi destroyers came first, small and fast and eager. They dove into the battle without hesitation, their weapons adding to the storm of fire. Behind them came the Volanthi cruisers, their elegant ships cutting through Keth formations with surgical precision, and then the Thesari carriers launched their fighters. Hundreds of small craft poured into the battle, overwhelming the Keth defenders with sheer numbers. Admiral Grant received the communication from the Allied fleet commander. It was the Volanthi elder from the assembly, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. We could not let you fight alone, the elder said. Whatever happens here, we face it together. Grant felt something catch in his throat. He took a moment to compose himself before responding. Thank you, he said simply. Form up on our flanks. Let's finish this. The combined fleet pressed its attack. Human determination met alien courage, and together they crashed against the Keth like a wave against rocks. Dr. Amy Price had been analyzing data from captured Keth transmissions throughout the battle. Now, finally, she found something useful. Admiral, she called out, I've found a weakness. Their command ships have a gap in their shields near the engine section. If we concentrate fire there, we can cripple them. Grant relayed the information to the entire fleet. Within minutes, the first Keth command ship was destroyed. Then another. And another. The enemy formation began to break apart. Without their command ships, the Keth fleet lost coordination. Individual vessels continued to fight, but the organized assault on the planet stopped. Lieutenant Scott flew through the wreckage of a Keth bomber, her fighter's hull scarred and smoking. She had lost half her squadron, but the bombers had stopped reaching the surface. The cities were still standing. On the ground, Sergeant Bennett reached the evacuation point with 300 civilians. Shuttles were launching constantly, carrying survivors to the safety of the fleet above. A little girl clung to Bennett's leg, crying for her mother. He picked her up and carried her toward the nearest shuttle. It's okay, he told her. You're safe now. We've got you. Above, the Keth fleet began to retreat. Their remaining ships turned away from New Harbor and fled toward the darkness of deep space. Admiral Grant watched them go. He did not order a pursuit. His fleet was battered and exhausted, and there were still people safe on the planet below. All ships, begin search and rescue operations, he commanded. Find everyone we can. The battle was over. Sergeant Bennett looked up at the sky from the surface of New Harbor. Through the smoke and clouds, he could see lights moving among the stars. Human ships and alien ships flying together. He had seen many things in his career, but he had never seen anything like this. The galaxy had come to help, and together they had won. 1 week had passed since the Battle of New Harbor. The colony was devastated. Entire districts had been reduced to rubble. Fires still burned in some areas too widespread to control. The streets were filled with debris and the echoes of what had been lost. But the colony was alive. Of the 2 million people who had lived on New Harbor, 1.8 million had survived. It was a miracle. Everyone knew it was a miracle. And everyone knew who had made it possible. Ambassador Daniel Porter walked through the largest refugee camp on the planet's surface. Tents stretched as far as he could see. People sat in groups, eating simple meals, tending to the wounded, comforting the grieving. They were tired and scared and hurt. But they were alive. A young man approached Porter. His clothes were torn and dirty, and there was a bandage wrapped around his head. But his eyes were clear. "You came for us," the young man said. His voice was thick with emotion. "We sent the distress call, but we didn't think anyone would reach us in time. And then your ships appeared in the sky." He paused, struggling to find words. "Thank you. Thank you for coming." Porter placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "We will always come," he said quietly. "Always." In orbit above the planet, Admiral Kevin Grant stood on the bridge of the Resolute Hope and counted his losses. The human fleet had lost 40% of its ships. 19 vessels destroyed. Thousands of crew members dead. The corridors of the surviving ships were filled with wounded. The Allied fleet had suffered similar losses. 30% of their ships were gone. Volanthi, Dasari, Korvathi. They had all paid a terrible price, but they had won. Against all odds, against an enemy that had not been defeated in 10,000 years. They had won. Grant received a communication request from the Volanthi Elder. He accepted it, and the alien's face appeared on the screen. "Admiral," the Elder said, "my people wish to thank you. What you did here, coming to fight when you knew you were outnumbered, inspired us to follow. We have never seen such courage." Grant shook his head slowly. "The courage was yours. You didn't have to come. New Harbor is a human colony. These are our people. You had no obligation to risk your lives for them." The Elder was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a strange expression on his alien face. "Before today, that might have been true," he said. "But I think things have changed. Your people showed us something important. You showed us what it means to be willing to die for others. How could we see that and not be moved?" Grant did not know what to say. For a man who had spent his career giving orders, he found himself without words. "We are with you now, Admiral," the Elder continued. "Whatever comes next, you will not face it alone." The communication ended. Grant stood in silence for a long time, looking out at the stars. 3 days later, the Galactic Assembly reconvened on the Sara Prime. But this time, everything was different. The hall was full, but the mood had changed. There was no bickering about trade routes or mining rights. There was only one topic of discussion. Ambassador Porter stood before the assembly. He was tired. His suit was wrinkled, but his voice was strong. "1 week ago, our colony was attacked," he began. "The Keth came without warning, without provocation, without mercy. They came to destroy everything we had built and everyone we loved." He paused, looking around the hall at the faces of 100 different species. "We did not know if we could stop them. We did not know if anyone would help us. But we went anyway, because there was no other choice. Our people were dying. We had to try." The hall was silent. Every delegate was listening. "And then something incredible happened," Porter continued. "You came. Species we had barely spoken to. Species we had never fought beside. You came, and you stood with us, and together we won." He turned to look at the Volanthi delegation, then the Dasari, then the Korvathi. "We cannot thank you enough. Words are not sufficient. But we will remember what you did. We will remember it forever." The Volanthi ambassador rose from his seat. He was old and dignified, and his voice carried across the entire hall. "Ambassador Porter, your people showed us something that day. You showed us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act despite fear. When you rushed from this assembly, we did not understand. Now we do." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was formal and deliberate. "I propose a new resolution. The formation of a joint defense coalition. An alliance of all species, pledged to defend each other against threats like the Keth. No world will face such danger alone again." The vote was immediate and unanimous. Every species in the assembly agreed. For the first time in galactic history, the civilizations of known space were truly united. After the session ended, Councilor Deshvara found Ambassador Porter in the corridor outside the hall. She approached him slowly, her silver face thoughtful. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. When you left the assembly that day, you did not ask for help. You simply left. Why?" Porter considered the question for a long moment. "Because we didn't know if anyone would come," he said finally. "We hoped, but we didn't know. It seemed wrong to ask others to die for our people when we weren't sure they would say yes." Deshvara nodded slowly. "And now?" Porter smiled. It was a tired smile, but a genuine one. "Now we know. You came. You all came." They looked back toward the assembly hall. "I don't think the galaxy will ever be the same." 1 year later, the first joint fleet patrol launched from the Sar Prime. Human warships flew in formation with Volanthi cruisers and Dasari carriers and Korvathi destroyers. Dozens of species working together, watching over the galaxy they shared. Admiral Grant stood on the bridge of the Resolute. Hopen watched the fleet through the viewing window. Beside him stood Commander Lisa Turner and Captain Ryan Cole. They had all survived. They had all changed. "You know," Turner said quietly, "a year ago, none of this seemed possible. A united fleet. Species that actually trust each other. It felt like a dream." "It was a dream," Grant replied. "For a long time, it was just a dream. What changed?" Grant thought about the question. He thought about the day they had rushed from the assembly, not knowing if anyone would follow. He thought about the ships that had appeared behind them, one by one. He thought about the battle and the victory and everything that came after. "We showed them who we are," he said finally, "and they decided to stand with us." Outside the window, the joint fleet moved through space in perfect formation. Human and alien, flying together toward the unknown. The galaxy had watched in terror as humans rushed from the assembly. Now, the galaxy rushed with them. And the universe would never be the same.